Okay, John, can we start with what's your earliest memory?
I think my earliest memory was the first day at school when my mother took me down to West Maitland infant school, and I can remember when she left, I followed, and halfway up Church Street she looked behind and I wasn't far behind her. Yeah.
And tell me more about that time. What was life like for you as a young boy, East Maitland, in that era?
Well, in West Maitland, my great-great-grandfather was a first fleeter, and my great-grandfather was his son, who was born on Norfolk Island in 1800, and when everyone from Norfolk Island was transferred to Tasmania when it was too costly to run Norfolk Island. So he went there, and he ran his father's farm at Sandy Bay in Hobart. And when Edward Risby died, my great-great-grandfather decided that he wanted to go alone, and he moved to the Nayland and came to Maitland in 1826. And he actually built the first hotel in Maitland. Yeah. And then when he was married, his mother bought him a block of land up behind the hospital because that was the highest point in Maitland, and the hotel that his father had built was washed out with floods a couple of times. So, we're old pumpkin pickers, really. I went to school at Maitland Public School and Maitland High School, and my memories of high school were wonderful. It was a great school in East Maitland, and I can remember I did reasonably well at school, but I knew that I wouldn't be going to university in Sydney, so I didn't take honours for the leaving certificate. I passed all my exams in the intermediate, and then leaving certificate, I got A's in maths and physics and chemistry, but my mother and father never spoke very much about what I was going to do when I left school, and I didn't have any idea either, really, until one day Mr. Penman, the headmaster, invited me in for a talk. It was after the leaving certificate exam, and he said, "Well, John, what are you going to do now?" And I said, "Well, I'm not sure, but my father suggested that I could get a job at the water board where he worked, or I thought maybe school teaching would be wonderful, or maybe because I'm good in maths, I might think of banking." And he said, "Well, three interesting jobs, John." He said, and he said, "I must say, if there was a university here, you'd get a degree in sport without any trouble." He said, "You've been in the athletics team, you don't play football, but you're the tennis champion." And he said, "You're in the school cricket team when you're in fourth year and captain in fifth year." So he said, "I don't know, but I must say, seriously, I've got a letter on my desk, and it's an invitation to take up a traineeship with BHP." And he said, "I think they're a company of the future and well based." And he said, "And I think you should seriously consider that." So I answered the invitation, and had an invitation to go down to a meeting of executives at the company on the day that they were choosing their trainees for 1942. This was. So I went down, and I got the train from Maitland I wasn't 17 then, 16 or 9 months. My father took me to the train, and I got on the train, and a lot of people on the train, and it got to Waratah Station about 8:40, and I happened to talk to a person on the train. They said, "Oh, we all work in the office at BHP. There's a bus at Waratah Station." So I hopped on the bus with them, stood the whole way, got over, and I found out where the conference room was. Went in, and it was full of young people. I thought, God, what chance have I got? Anyway, there were kids, obviously, kids with better passes than I had. They were chosen for the research department and the laboratory and, oh, goodness knows where. But I was standing in the corner with one other chap from Maitland High School, and I said, "We're out of luck, I think, Les." And he said, "Oh, never know." Anyway, they called out my name, and I walked up the table, and this chap who I found out later was apprentice trained, master apprentice. He was doing the selection for everything. He said, "Mr. Fraser, the superintendent of steelmaking, wants 2 trainees." And I see Mr. Fraser standing over, Bull Fraser they used to call him, standing over in the corner. I thought, "Oh, that sounds interesting, steelmaking." So I said, "Well, I'll accept that." And my friend Les, he accepted it too. And afterwards we thought, I think they picked us because we looked big and strong. So, and he said, "Okay, here's the form I want you to sign, and you better read it." So I read it through, and it looked okay, so I signed the bottom. He said, "You better sign this too." And I said, "What's this?" "Wanderers Rugby Union Football Club." I said, "I don't play football." He said, "You soon will." Well, I signed it. And to cut a long story short, I ended up playing 100 first grade game with Wanderers. And 2 years later, we beat Merewether Carlton in a grand final 6-3. And eight of that team were ex-private school kids from Sydney, where they played rugby union. But Maitland High School didn't even play rugby union. So that was good, but I was pleased when I got down there because I was also playing district cricket with Maitland team who were in the Newcastle competition then. But I'd always, when I signed this, my real thought was, gee, I can get to Newcastle and play on good cricket pitches, and I can get to District Park grass tennis courts. I said, great. Well, I hardly ever played competitive tennis again. So that was how I started, and I almost threw in the towel at one stage. They said, when I signed the sheet, must have been mid-December, they said, "Oh, by the way, you can start next Monday if you like," which was about 10 days before Christmas. We'll put you in as a junior labourer till your leaving certificate results come out. I said, "Oh, it's okay." So I turned up at work at 8 o'clock, at 9 o'clock the first day, and then they quickly reminded me the shift started at 8. And I got to the open hearth, and I was amazed. The open hearth, I thought, it might be a little, where they had a little furnace. There were 12 furnaces in a line. The building was 400 metres long. The change room was 2-storey. There were 800 lockers in the change room. And there must have been about 600 showers. God, what's this? And so I worked a week as a junior labourer and learnt a job of tracking all the iron that was produced at the blast mill. And at the end of the week they said, "Oh well," which happened to be the Friday before Christmas on the Sunday night. And Friday was a payday, so I got my first pay, 7 days, £3 1 and threepence. And as I was leaving, the foreman, he said, "You know the job and you know the man who's been training to track all this. You can start on his shift, night shift next week." I said, oh, good, Monday night? He said, no, Sunday night, Christmas night. I thought, this is not going to last very long. 46 years later, I guess I was happy I did.
Going back, John, what was life like as a young child in West Maitland? What did you do? How did you survive? What did your parents do? What was a common day for you?
Well, I think my parents had some relatives there, and they used to have family social occasions. My mother and father weren't socialites in any way, but we didn't always have a car. We had our first car in about 1938, an old Dodge, but we had friends with cars and we used to go on picnics, and Sunday afternoon when we had a car, one of the things that we always did was drive through the farms and buy all the produce we needed for the week from the wayside stalls. And my mother and father used to do that religiously. They didn't always, as I grew up, they didn't always insist that I go with them. I often preferred to go and play marbles with the kids or kick a football around the paddock or play. I learnt my cricket in Adam Street, which was near our home and a dead-end street, and we used 2 kerosene tins for each of the wickets. And when the neighbours complained about the noise of hitting these cans, we moved them up the street a bit. We had friends with a tennis court, and they used to take me around, watch them play tennis as parents, and I got to get a hit at the ball after a while. And I always had ball sense for some reason. I could always throw straight, and I could always kick a football well, and I was in the athletics team, and so I can see now that I passed that on to 3 sons. We all love their sport, and it wasn't an exciting youth, but Dad always had work with the water board. He ended up as officer in charge of Maitland and Cessnock District Water Board.
What about the war years? What do you remember of that? What's your recollection?
Oh, I remember Dad's bike more than anything. Dad's bike had a lamp on the front of it with a black shutter on it with louvers so the light shone on the ground. And that was just before I joined the company. Of course, I was working during the war years, and that was an education for me. That was one of the best parts of my working life, because we can go on from there.
Yeah, tell me about that.
When I joined steelmaking, it was an art rather than a science. I guess there were 800 people worked in the open heart. There were bricklayers and demolishers on each shift. There were 14 furnaces with 3 furnacemen on each furnace, and there wouldn't have been more than 3 people in that 800 that knew exactly what was going on in the furnace. They knew what to look for. First helper of the furnace was jealous of his knowledge. He used to look through the wicket holes in the doors of the furnace, and he would decide that he had to add something or increase the heat or decrease the heat, but he didn't know why, had no idea what was happening. And even the samples they took out of the furnace, some of the old furnace had chilled that sample and break it in half and look at the grain and then throw the samples back in the furnace so nobody could see them. But it was an art, complete art. And during the war, we were called on to make shell steel and steel for the Owen guns, steel for special traps in the harbour, wire trap, steel for aircraft cylinders for boomerangs and the fighters that we made in Melbourne. All that was new and a challenge. And I think other than 2, there were 3 senior metallurgists to me. 2 of them were qualified, 1 nearly finished, and then there were about 6 others who were training. And I went through those war years and to have that challenge of making those steels. And we even got to the stage where we had training classes for the furnacemen. And to tell them what actually going on, what they were actually seeing, that was a brilliant change in the concept of steel making, probably in Australia anyway. I can always remember one education, one group of furnacemen we had in, and one of our best young first helpers, a returned bloke from the war, and he was brilliant. He was a brilliant furnaceman, didn't know a thing. And after this week, he said, "Well, John," he said, "that's an eye-opener." He said, "I never really knew where that bloody carbon went to." And that, you know, they were amazed, some of them, to know what was really happening, what the chemical process was.
So they were receptive to being told the science behind
wonderful, yeah. So, yeah, I had one incident early in my piece. They had a 24-hour stoppage, the works, and I heard that they were going to have a meeting at the where was it in town? It was the stadium. And I thought, oh, I better go in and see what goes on here. So I went in, and there was hundreds of people, hundreds of blokes. I got up near the ring and so I could hear better. And they were shouting and raving, and there was blokes trying to get in the ring, and I was trying to, and a hand on my shoulder. I looked round, it was one of the furnacemen off my feet. He said, "John, you better piss off. You'll be in trouble."
So was there a division between staff and workers at BHP when you were there? What was that?
It was one of the things later on that made me accept a couple of positions. I was never in favour of management ways in the company. It was autocratic. Do as I say, no answer. Leave your brains at the gate. Don't want to know what you think. I thought, you know, it must be a better way. So later on I'll mention that. But it was an interesting life. I worked 13 years shift work. It was all shift work until 3 years after I was married. But and during those times, the unions allowed six of us in training to work as supernumerary furnacemen to get to know the process. What they forgot to say was to get to know how to do all the bloody work that the union mate's supposed to be doing. So that was pretty tough 3 months. Learned how to swing a 14-pound hammer on a bar over somebody's shoulder. You're frightened you might hit them in the head. I guess it was all knowledge.
What about social life within the business when you first joined? Was there a camaraderie between the workers?
Well, I travelled from Maitland for a little while, but when tech started the next year in February, I could see that wasn't on, so I went to board with relatives in Mayfield, and that wasn't on either. So I soon left them and went to a new boarding house in Hamilton. This was all interesting because these changes, I played cricket with Maitland in Newcastle competition. When I went to Mayfield, I had to play with Warwickshire. When I went to Hamilton, I had to play with Hamilton. Then when I got married, I went back to Mayfield. And then we had a flat in Newcastle. I played with Newcastle City. And then finally over to Merriweather. Yeah, it's interesting time.
And what about TAFE, John? Where was that?
Tyres Hill. Tyres Hill was actually built to accommodate apprentices and trainees back in about 1935, Essington Lewis said we have to have a staff training scheme. And the only training facility in those days was in the city, small teaching. I forget what they call it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. And then they built the technical college. And there was so many trained there, and it was so successful. I think that might have been a very good reason why we got a university in the future. Because it was a pretty tough course, metallurgy. 6 years, 3 nights a week, 3 hours a night, finish at 9:30, go to work at midnight. When you were on afternoon shift, you went there in the morning. You didn't have much time for football training or cricket practice.
So, John, do you remember what it was like as a young boy, as 16, 9 months, turning up at BHP with all these men, working shift work, catching public transport, the bus?
Yeah.
What was that like as a young boy?
Well, it was a bit, I think we were getting £3. Incidentally, when I became a trainee, fully fledged trained, they reduced my salary to £2.10, and I paid £1.10 for board, so money wasn't in too heavy in your pocket. But I think a lot of the staff of the furnaces and the steel making when I started were generally very old. A lot of them had been through World War One. A couple of the old first helpers on furnaces had been gassed and suffered enormously, but I couldn't get over just how hard and how stinking hot and debilitating a lot of the work was. Left a terrible sense of something in my mind. I wanted to change it. And that came along later on after the war. The furnaces had been belted pretty hard during the wartime, and about 1950, until 1950, struggled on until about 1957, and the company decided to upgrade the open heart furnaces into bigger furnaces. Newcastle management did a wonderful thing. They took a risk and they decided they would install basic oxygen steel making, which had only been discovered and started in Austria in 1953. So I was only 6 or 7 years old. And they decided, after a couple of technical fellows went overseas and liked what they saw. So I was technical assistant to the superintendent at that stage, and superintendent called me in one day. He said, we're going to get rid of the open heart steel making. I thought, gee, I mightn't have a job. He said, no, we're going to put in basic oxygen steel making. I'd read a bit about it. And he said, I want you to head that up and be in charge of the construction and training and the start-up and everything. Oh, I thought, here's a chance. So we went overseas to Canada and trained 6 of us. I was in charge of the group. We trained at Algoma Steel up near Sault Ste. Marie on Lake Superior. They had a 100-ton furnace. Our company, I think they were very game. They said, we'll have a 200-ton furnace. And they said the 200-ton furnace should make 1.8 million tonnes of steel a year, and the record for 14 open heart furnaces is 1.1 million tonnes. I thought, boy, what's this animal all about? But we saw it operate, and the big thing I saw about it was that all the hot, stinking, dirty, debilitating work was gone. All that work disappeared with this new process. So I thought, this is a great opportunity for me. And we had a few problems starting up. Engineering, Head Wrightson, an English firm, did the engineering. they left a lot to be desired, and the local refractories makers let us down. They went overseas to study the new refractory, and I operated the furnace in 1963, the first heat, and the lining fell in. So we had 180 tonnes of molten iron in the furnace with bricks and God knows what. I had to chip it all out, and sparks and splashes broke all the glass windows in my operating cabinet and burnt up all the paperwork we had in there. We got rid of it and rebuilt it, and we fixed the refractories, and after 12 months it was really a going concern. It was a great process, and the general manager, Bob Colton, at the time, used to come along to the operating floor every morning and say, well, how'd things go last night? And I'd be there, and I said, well, pretty good. We made 24 heats out of one furnace in 24 hours. 200 tonnes apiece, which was some sort of record. And he said, that's good, but he said, I've got another answer I'd like from you. He said, we're building another plant at Wyell, a 100-tonne furnace. I'd like you to go over and be superintendent steelmate. I said, you, that's me. He said, don't you want to ask Dorothy? I said, I will tonight. Thing that flashed through my mind straight away was, I can jump 3 places in the hierarchy. I can do it my way, because they've got no steel making there. And I can do the things I want to do with human relations. And that's how it worked out. When I got over there, it was great. I went over first, and I walked into General Manager's office, who was in charge of all the iron ore production on Eyre Peninsula. He said, well, John, he said, you've been recommended to us. And he said, I know bugger all about steel making, so whatever you want, you can have. Well, it was pretty traumatic, the move, of course. Dorothy leaving her family, and I was leaving my mother and sister. My father had died. No, he hadn't died before I left. But we got there, and we settled down. Dorothy could see my reason for leaving and going to Wyler, and I knew I'd have her support. But when I got there, we had no home to go into. We were in a motel for 2 weeks. But we were there through the final construction, able to make a few changes in construction that weren't working in Newcastle. And strangely enough, it was a bit of a cold reception over there, because they had an electric furnace, and they thought that their electric furnace man would be in charge of this BOS plant, which didn't happen. But they finally warmed to us. In fact, Russell Burge was in charge of all the 2 rolling mills, the Bloom Mill and the Universal Mill, the rolling mill, and he came from Newcastle originally too. So we got together, and Keith Bennett, the general manager, said, you're running the place. Just yell if you want anything. So we got together and decided that we'd make a few changes straight away, and we had a chat. I had a chat to the chap in charge of the Iron Workers Union. His main concern was salaries, and I said, look, you're getting the same, blokes are getting the same salaries they get in Newcastle. I guarantee you that. Okay. Johnny Watson was his name. Nice old bloke, but luckily he went along with everything I suggested. And one of the things in Newcastle that always happened, if they had a gripe and they wanted to talk to the full-time official, they had a gate meeting. And a gate meeting at Newcastle, 100% of the time, resulted in a 24-hour stoppage. because some of the blokes would even go to that meeting dressed ready to go home. The blokes that wanted to go to the beach or fishing or something. And of course they lost half a shift pay, and the afternoon and night shift lost a full shift. But it cost the company $1 million. They had to slow down the furnaces. The mills had to stop and take the blast furnaces back, and they have to wind them up again. The first thing I did in Wales was say, okay, if you fellas have got any gripes and they want a meeting, they can have a quarter of an hour on the plant as long as work doesn't stop. Okay, that worked well. Didn't have a 24-hour stop for 6 years. It was for 10 years. So we got going, and the start up there was brilliant. I've got a plaque at home with an outline in steel of the furnace. And that was actually the first steel poured out of the ladle we tapped into. And the first steel we made was rolled on a Saturday afternoon, and on Sunday it was rolled to angles and ready for sale by Monday morning. And that impressed the old general manager there, so we were sweet from there on.
John, can I just go back to BHP here at Newcastle during the war? What influence did that have on the steel making and the submarine coming into Newcastle? What's your experience of that?
Well, I was on night shift, the night we were shelled. And I was just 17 in 1942. And my first job on night shift was to go along to all the furnaces and see when they like me to pour iron from the blast furnace into these furnaces. And I was walking towards the east end of the plant, and I could, this huge building had a panel of iron left out all the way around to induce some draft, cool the place down. I could see these flashes of lights and searchlights and think, what the hell's going on here? Must be some naval exercises or something. So I got down, they were still going, and I went out being curious. Outside the building there was an outside stairway to the top where the overhead crane drivers went in. And so I climbed up the top and on the end of the building. I was a couple 100 feet up. And I could see I didn't hear any noise at the time, but I could see all the searchlights and flashes and everything. Then I heard some funny noises going overhead. I hurried back down the stairs, and at the end of the operating floor of the furnaces there was a small laboratory. As I went past, the phone rang. The chemist hadn't arrived on shift or something. I went in, hello, who's that? And I told him, and he was one of the executive officers. We're being attacked from the sea. Tell the melter as quick as he can to black out all the furnaces. I thought to myself, that's like painting the Harbour Bridge. Anyway, I went and told him, and they tried their best to put a bit of mud and bricks over any flares, and then we all went down into a air raid shelter. Yeah.
And what happened in the morning? What was the
Well,
result?
when we come out of the air raid shelter at about 6 o'clock in the morning, I think everyone went to sleep. But there was a hell of a mess. The slag in the furnace had foamed and run out on the floor. Day shift were going to have a hell of a time, but we were going home to bed. Yes, that was a bit of a wake-up call, and but strangely enough, when I came back to Newcastle as general manager, over in the corner of my office there was a shell. One of the shells that hadn't exploded. I thought, the bastard's still after me.
So, how did you end up back in Newcastle?
Well, we did very well in Whyalla. Industrial relations were great, and to operate this plant, without all that dirty, debilitating work. I don't think there would have been more than half a dozen shovels in the place, and the operation was sweet. It's the best 100-ton furnace operation I've ever visited, and it's still going. Luckily, Mr. Gupta has bought Arium Steel now, and it makes all Australia's rails in that plant, which is another story. But towards the end of the time, I spent 2 years out in the plant. Then they made me manager iron and steel making, and then assistant general manager. In 1975 or 1980, I was general manager of the plant. And during that time, we had a lot of management training program, and we included we included union people in that with our staff, and they loved it really. And my main theme was, I said, I want all you staff to have people working with you instead of for you. That's it. So
where did that attitude come from, John?
Me.
How?
Because I realised how much you could get if you the last 5 or 10% of your productivity comes from your workforce working with you as a teamwork. The teamwork had to include the men, not just teamwork of staff. And that paid off in Whyalla. It was great. But towards the end of my term as general manager over there, Brian Layton, who was chief general manager at the time, said we're having a lot of industrial trouble in the Pilbara, Western Australia. And he said, we'd like you to go over there. I said, Brian, you've given me 16 years in Whyalla when I thought we might only have 10, and you want me to go to Western Australia. I said, I couldn't ask the family to do that. And he said, oh, fair enough, John. Yeah, okay, I'll accept that. I went home, I said to Dorothy, we might have to be here a few more years. But it was only the next week he rang me to say, we want you to go to Newcastle as general manager. And I thought, oh, gee, that's a target. And he said, the only things he added was, he said, we want some change in Newcastle. I didn't answer, and he said, I'll leave it up to you to work that out. He said, you should know Newcastle. I said, yeah. And I said to myself, it's this inbred thing, this seniority thing amongst staff. And sure enough, it was. So I had to make a few changes when I came back, and I loved it.
Tell me about that. What were the changes that
the first change we made, every morning, midweek, Monday to Friday, there was a general managers conference at 9:30. And before that, executive office had to run around the plant, find out what went on all night, and used to worry hell out of people on the plant who were trying to get the plant back on an even keel if it was gone off. And we used to hate it. They'd take our mind off the real important work. So that stopped immediately. And there would have been 30 or 40 people at that general managers conference who needn't be there. So I stopped that and changed it to one general managers conference PM Monday, and I would have a managers conference Wednesday and Friday. And the assistant general manager at the time said, don't you want to, you want to tell us I said, you're running the steel plant, I'm general manager, you're running operation. He said, oh geez, that's a bit of a change. I said, you don't expect me to deal with the community and make all these decisions. Anyway, he lapped that up really. That was good. And I said to the manager, I said, well, as an additional thing to this conference thing, I said, also you fellas are in charge of industrial matters on the plant. There's no more of this business outside the gate. If your fellas want a meeting, they can have a quarter of an hour if it doesn't stop production. And if it goes any further, you're very involved, not the industrial department. Before as soon as there was a bitch on the plant, they'd ring the industrial department. And they'd be talking to the bloody industrial court and everything. So that stopped. I said, what else are you going to do? And I said, oh, there's a few other things. I said, safety. Whenever they had an unsafe problem on the plant, they called the safety department. I said, it's your patch, fix it. You know better than the safety department how to fix it. The same as industrial, the superintendent knows better what's fair. So that all happened too.
Was that accepted, John, or did that take a little while, or do you think that was on board?
6 months, I suppose. 6 months or more till they got used to it. And I reckon the next thing I changed was I talked to our solicitor. He's a member of the club too, so won't let him. I said, what's our compensation cases costing us? He said, roughly $3 million a year. I said, spell it out, is it, do we win any? No, I knew that, we didn't win many. I said, okay, from now on, you settle out of court, even if it's on the doorstep of the courthouse. He said, gee, you won't be well liked for that. I said, can't help that. So we saved $1 million the first year. And I tried to talk Jerry Ellis at Port Kimberley to do the same. He said, I'll have to try it. He said it cost us $5 million down here with the South Australian Labor Council, who were bad unit. But all those changes went pretty well. And the BOS plant was humming along then, making records and doing well, so pretty pleasing part of my life.
Moving on from that, John, I mean, eventually BHP closed its gates. Tell me about that transition of being the best system that you'd visited to not making steel in Newcastle anymore.
Well, in this period in 80 to 85, when we couldn't sell anything on the export market because we'd be selling at a loss. There was a glut of steel making around the world. So we had to get rid of out of 1.8 million tonnes, we had to get rid of 500,000 tonnes. So we worked that out, number of mill shifts and everything, and decided we had to get rid of 5,000 people. So going through that was another time when I had close relationship with the Iron Workers Association. In fact, I used to see McCarthy, who was head of the Iron Workers. He had an office at Mayfield there, and I used to go and see him a couple of times a week, talk about things, and he accepted my word for it. I went to him once and said, the last 300 blokes have got to go in a few weeks' time. And he said, yeah, okay, we accept that. I said, I've got one problem though. The 300 in seniority are all young blokes with families and good workers. And I said, I've got 300 blokes who have got a rotten history wouldn't work at an iron lung and have been bad employee. He said, I think I know what you're telling me. He said, I'll give you 2 months. So we saved the jobs of 300 young, married, good workers, the blokes that would never work. And I thought, gee, if I can do that occasionally, it's good.
What do you think gave you the ability to negotiate like that and have people accept what you said as being?
Oh, I think just because I was, one of the things that I always asked my managers to do was be consistent in their ruling, be consistent and be, consistent and, what's the other word? Anyway, you know, but you have to be consistent with your decision making. You made favourites with people, you know, you were gone, dead duck.
Moving towards the closure, what happened there?
Well, I'd retired in 1986, so we got another 13 years out of the plant. I'd been told if we didn't make a profit in 84, 85, the plant could close then. So we got through that. We spent some money upgrading the rod mill, and then I retired, and I think there was a wind down then. The company could see the writing on the wall that they'd have to replace the coke ovens for a start. We had to try and keep those going, but they were in bad shape. Blast furnaces needed a rebuild. And the other thing that people might know, when I came back to Newcastle, the general manager came to me and said, I've got a case here, needs your signature. It's a proposition that's going to the board in 3 weeks' time to build another blast furnace on Kooragang Island to take our production to 3 million tonne. Oh, geez, I said, what's the history of this, Ron? He said, it's been to Melbourne a couple of times and they wanted some changes, but now they're agreed with these changes. We've rewritten the proposition and it only needs your signature. It'll go to the board. And I said, I'm not signing. Christ, he said, I've had hundreds of people working on this. I said, I know, Ron. Can't sell the bloody steel. Where are you going to sell the steel? Oh, well, the marketing blokes will do that. I said, we couldn't sell it 2 years ago. Where are you going to sell another 1 million tonne? So I didn't sign it. And it was only a year later, Brian Loughton said to me, I'm glad you didn't send that proposition to Melbourne. But that was a setback, you know, for the guys that had worked so hard on this new proposition. They were going to build a new bridge across the river there and bring treadwell ladles with iron across the BOS plant, put in a third furnace. Oh, geez. Been the biggest white elephant in Newcastle. Anyway, yeah.
So looking back over your career at BHP, what do you see as your biggest achievements? What's brought you the most joy first?
Basic oxygen steel, mate. Better conditions for the blokes. I did some of the jobs that they did full time. Jesus. I said to Sir Ian McLennan once, when we were towards commissioning at Wyler, I said, I'm glad we haven't got open hearts, Sir Ian. I said, we wouldn't get people to man. And he said, you'll always get people to man the steelworks. I thought to myself, you know nothing about conditions. No.
The beginning of your career working there as a labourer, do you think that set you up for your ability to be able to communicate with the workers?
Being my first supervisory job with return blokes, 8th, 9th and Division bloke, they were tough. They taught me a thing or two. I won't tell you what they said to me, I'll tell you later. That helped me. I mean, I think senior executives need to know a little bit what's going on out the front counter sort of thing. bankers might too.
I understand that there's so many types of people that have gone through BHP.
Yeah.
And you had people that were hard workers, you had people that wouldn't work in an
Yeah.
iron lung.
Yeah.
But have you got a general characterisation of the people that worked on the floor in the steel industry in
Oh,
Newcastle?
generally speaking, none of them would let you down in a crisis. We saw the best of men when we had a breakout in the furnace. When you got 100 tons of molten steel running around, oxy bottles and things like that, just how good they were. But there were always a bad element there, a small bad element, which you had to realise you had to watch closely and try and turn them around. And some of the better men were prone to listen to this song that they used to sing. So, but generally speaking, 90% of blokes were great. Yeah, real Australians. You know, they'd have a go, they'd buck you. And when you're in trouble, they'd be there behind you. Yeah.
Danger, safety. Tell me about that, John.
I was behind the furnace when I was assistant melter before I became technical assistant to superintendent. A furnace broke away down from a platform where we tapped the furnace, and it was assistant melter's job to actually burn the tap hole out. And I was going round to tap the furnace, and the furnace started to run through beside it. There's no way you could stop it. And it was running around oxy bottles. So I grabbed the blokes and got them out of the way, and one of the oxy bottles blew up, and half of it finished up in the blue milk 300 yards away. But I think the closest shave I ever had was came on shift, and one of the furnaces had broken away, and there was 100 tons of steel down in the pit at the back of the furnace, and they cooled it down with hoses, and they had the only way to get rid of it was to get the overhead crane through a short hole in the tapping platform and chains round this steel to lift it so they could drag it out the way. And the bloke was fiddling around, so I went down and had my gloves on, and I actually held the crane ropes steady and got the crane in the right position, and then I told him to hoist slowly, and he hoisted a bit quick and slapped those two wires together and left my glove in it.
Yeah.
So I could have been a one-armed batsman.
John, you've had plenty of what you call opportunities to move ahead in your working career, but I suppose taking an opportunity sometimes means taking a risk. How do you approach the risk of failure, perhaps, when you take these big, momentous steps in your working career?
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's a matter of risk-taking. I think there's always a chance in heavy industry that things will go wrong, but when you've done your best technically and physically to bring about what's going to happen or what you're going to do, then I guess you go ahead and do it if you're happy with how you've approached or planned what you're going to do. And the lining falling in the furnace was something that we knew was a problem, because in our training overseas we presented a paper at the Iron and Steel Institute World Conference at Pittsburgh, and after that we met a lot of the steel makers in America, and by dubious various means we got invitations to their plant, because they were in the process of building a 200-ton furnace also. In fact, we were the first 200-ton furnace in the world to commission, but there were 5 US companies who were in the process of building, and we got to see them, and their big worry was the bricking of the cone of this furnace. there was a hole at the top and sloping side, and you had brickwork going on. They were all worried because there was a new technology in refractories, and the angle, they were all playing around with the angle of this cone, and whether it was squat vessel like that or a thin vessel. So we got to talk with a lot of those experts, and when we went back, I knew we had a slight problem. And it was all, and I thought, if it's we did all we could. We had the best bricklayers we had brick the cone of that furnace. And I thought, if we got trouble, that's it. I operated the furnace. We poured the iron into the furnace, and I brought the furnace up. I put the lance in. And this lance, the oxygen, that's why I got hearing aids. You blow 13,000 cubic feet of high oxygen per minute onto this bar. And the flame started above the furnace. I said, "You beauty, everything's right." All of a sudden it went black. I thought, I know what's happened. So I took the lance out, and we got a ladder and worked up. All this cone brickwork had fallen in. So we just had to empty it and start again. But then we had to talk to the refractory suppliers who were local, hadn't done their homework, and we had to take over the manufacture of the brick and change it a bit. We did that ourselves, and we got going. The other furnace wasn't ready, so we had to re-brick that furnace. But we got going in about 10 days' time, and everything was all right then because the refractories were just all right. But we then took the decision to import some linings from overseas, which were well and truly tried and tested in smaller furnaces, and that was all right then, and everything was joke. But first linings we had in Whyalla were Japanese. I can guarantee you that they were perfect. But I think, generally speaking, you have occasions like that, and you just, you test your experience and your knowledge to some extent. You never put people in danger. You always be consistent with what you tell them. And I wrote all the operating manuals and safe working manuals for oxygen steel making. And so that helped a lot. I went through all that with overseas people and what I'd learnt.
John, we're recording this in the Newcastle Club, New Common Street.
Yeah.
What's your connection to this club? How did that take place?
Well, that's an interesting one, and I'd love to tell you about it. I wasn't a member before I went to Whyalla in 1964. I'd often been here to dinner because our executive officers used to take we steelmakers to a big dinner at the club when we broke records. Because prior to me being president of this club, there were only two previous BHP general managers present. One was Mr. Butler, who he was general manager when I started, 1941, and the other one was Mr. Bradford, back in the 30s, or late 20s. So I knew a bit about the club and just a little background story. Clary was one of the famous waiters here in those days, and famous waiter, and you should try and get him sometime because he got to know me a bit, and I met him again after I went to Whyalla, and when I came, I met him only at these dinners. Used to have a chat with him. When I came back from Whyalla, he came up, "Oh, Mr. Risby, back again." And he said, "Do you still have a dash of lemon in your beer?" One of those characters of the club. But, no, I went to these dinners at the club, and it struck me as being a very nice club, but I think you had to really, my impression was you really had to be in the social set and a professional man in the city to belong to the club. I don't say you look down on, but disregarded a little bit. And I thought, funny, because everything else is good. The staff were nice, and it was the venue was nice. While I was in Wyala, I stayed back here a couple of times, and the iron frame beds weren't quite long enough for me, and my legs used to poke out the front. And it was summer, and you'd have to have the windows up and the windows up across the aisle to get a bit of draft. But but afterwards, when I came back, it was quite different. They because of my position, I think they drafted me into the club inside 12 months and onto the committee inside 3 or 4 years. But yeah, well, I was back in Newcastle just 1 month, and the manager engineering came to me and said, I had a ring from the club. I said, oh, what, golf club? No, Newcastle club. Oh, I said, okay, Ron, what's wrong? He said, their electrical installations are shot. Oh, I said, oh, that's interesting. So, what's that all about? He said, oh, we've done a little bit of work for the club occasionally. Oh, he said, yes, all our general managers have been on committee or members. And he said, they all use the club. He said, so we do a few jobs for. I said, what's the job? He said, to rewire the club. I said, that's nice. How much, Ron? Oh, chief electrical engineer said probably 20,000. I said, oh, that sounds good. How are you going to do it? He said, I thought it'd be good experience for our senior electrical apprentices. So I'll get the master of electrical apprentice chief and 10 of the senior electrical electrical apprentices, and they'll do it. I said, where does the money go? Where do I find that 20,000? He said, oh, number 2 blast furnace is being relined. So it went on a little bit, a few other occasions. I heard stories years prior to that when they were digging the driveway into the club. It used to be a flat level, and the wall and the parking outside was they clothes props there where all the washing dried, and they decided to put in the ramp and make it the car park, talking to the cathedral. And so they dug it out and got rid of the wall that was there with the house next door, which was on a bit of a slope. And over the week, didn't work at the weekend, but over the weekend there was a downpour of rain and washed everything out from under the house. And Ron said he was chief construction engineer then. He got a ring from the manager engineering, so Mr. Bishop, general manager, just been in touch. He said, they've got a problem at the club. He wants you to go up, Ron, and have a look, see what the problem was. Ron said, I got to the club and the house next door was on the tip. So he said, I got the construction department, the truck and 2 huge balks of timber, got them under the house and jacked it up straight, left the balks of timber there, and then got the contractor to pump concrete under it. Oh, he said, finally we had it stabilised and we rebuilt the fence with, you notice the fence outside with that was blast furnace slag fall. All round the club are blast furnace slag fall. They were all, and George Bishop said to manager engineering, Ron, he said, I hope that didn't cost too much. Ron said, oh no, a couple $100 fix it up.
How much concrete?
Yes, that concrete walls are quite interesting too, because in my studies for metallurgy I did a research into blast furnace slag, and you can tell by the look of those blocks of slag the approximate analysis of the iron that sat on. You see some of those balls of slag are pretty porous, and you know then that the silicon content was probably less than 0.5%, and the very fine grain slag indicated that slag was very hot, so the silicon content would be over 1%. So there's a story all around there.
What do you see the benefit of having a club like the Newcastle Club here in this city?
Well, I think from experience, you find these clubs of virtually every capital city, and of course, as you know, we've got 105 or more reciprocal clubs around the world now, and we managed to start that rolling actually after the earthquake, but I could say more about that later. I think it's you need a club where really you don't carry out business, but where business people can relax. And we often heard people, oh, you can't go there, that's the gentleman's club. I mean, if you look at the dictionary and see what a gentleman is, none of us would qualify really. But we always, to test new members' applications, our test was, can you say that this man acts like a gentleman, and would you have him home for dinner? That was our interpretation of gentleman. I think it was you were able to be here and talk safe. You were always safe here. It's hard to put a nail in that wishboard.
What have you seen in your time here as the changes, and have you implemented or been supportive of some of them, and perhaps not support others? What do you see?
Well, one of the it's not worrying. It's one of the changes that's happening everywhere. It's informality. When I first joined the club, it was coat and ties everywhere, and in the main dining room, perhaps without air conditioning on a stinking hot night. Virtually, if the senior member took his coat off, everyone else could. You had to sort of ask. It was the same with smoking. Couldn't smoke until the senior member smoked. So it was all pretty formal, but and then as time went on, as society changed, there was more people who wanted to dress without ties and without coats. And that's all right, but my fear is that if it goes too far, then you let down, especially let down the ladies now who are members. They always come to the club well dressed, and I'd hate to see this club go be in a situation where members are not as well dressed as staff, put it that way.
What about the Cordial Club?
Cordial Kids?
The Cordial Kids.
Well, that started in the early 50s when Bob Bruce and Joe Telty, who were dentists in town, they came to the club every lunchtime. Walked back leisurely, pull teeth and drill teeth. And they were sitting always in the dining room in that corner where we have lunch. And the president came up one day, he said, "Oh, you fellas here for lunch? How are Joe? How are you, Bob? Where's your bottle of wine?" They said, "Oh, we don't drink at lunchtime. We've got to go back and work." The Cordial Kids, huh? So it's been going ever since. And Joe Telty only died 8 or 9 years ago, I suppose. And we've changed the rules a little bit. But we only have we're only offered a glass of red on the third Thursday of the month.
Why are you part of that? What keeps you coming here and on the Thursdays to the Cordial kids?
Well, I was, I guess after I was president and worked for the club, and I was retired, and they said, oh, you know, might make a nice member. And I knew Sonny de Carvalho, and I played cricket with him. He was a member. I don't know how he became a member. They invited me, and it's been good fun. Yeah.
Can we talk a bit about your sporting? You've been active all your life.
Yeah.
You were playing cricket in the days where whatever suburb you lived in determined what.
Yeah.
Have you got a? Are you allowed to say what club you enjoyed playing for the most?
Oh, I enjoyed playing with all of them. I particularly liked playing with Waratah because they had a captain, Jack Mays, who was a great bloke. He was an ex-coalfields man, and he taught me more about captaincy and how you should treat sporting people, in other words, which is a bit different to industrial people, but same sort of thing. Now and again he'd see one of his team walk on the field with a watch on. He'd send him back, give it to the scorer till you come back. And you wouldn't dare put your cap in your back pocket. I've seen cricketers do that. And I've seen him when we were getting dressed to go out in the field, he would look around the room, everyone sitting down, he'd spot somebody with yellow socks on or something. He'd say, where's your white cream sock? Oh, they were dirty. Oh, put these on. I don't want to see them again. And he said, as in the shed, if there were new players, he said, oh, by the way, he said, I don't want to have to be screaming out from first left, tell you to move in the field. Just keep your eye on me all the time. And I found out just recently from Ron Harvey, who played for the state, played good cricketer. I still hold a record with Waratah Mayfield. 10th wicket partnership. Cleve Betton's a slow left-arm bowler, and I put on 105 for the 10th wicket, and I got 100 of them.
Who was your partner?
Cleve Betton's, but I was 30 or 40 not out when he came in, and I got 60 more, and he got 3, I think. He just kept saying to me, we were playing Wickham, who had a good side, a couple of good slow bowlers, bloody playing. He said, I'll just hold my eye, I'm not scoring any runs.
He was right.
It was funny, we went over to the Waratah Town Hall Hotel there at Waratah for a beer afterwards, and a couple of bowlers were down the bar. Oh, bloody cricketers hitting balls over and damaging our green all the time. No, I enjoyed cricket. Cricket was my game, but I enjoyed golf. I start playing golf when I gave up football. I had to do something.
So who did you play for the Wanderers?
Yeah, I that first year I played 3rd grade. I arrived at the ground with, I bought a pair of shorts and I had football boots and I had khaki socks, I think, and I thought, oh, I'll get a jersey. No, we don't, you buy your own jersey, blue jersey. So somebody gave me a jersey, I think it wasn't blue, but anyway, the 3rd grade ran on. They were generally, almost certainly every time they played, they went onto the field with less than 15 people. Because in those days, people worked Saturday morning, and a lot of them anyway wanted to have a couple of beers at Stan Brain's before they played football. 3rd grade wasn't very serious. So I played that first game. They said, oh, you're tall, you can play in the forwards, play lock and you'll be good in the line out. I'd been to practice once. So I went in and I thought, the different colour shirt, I reckon everyone tackled me. Not only the opposition. So I said, not for me, but I remember late in the game they got a penalty and they threw the ball to me. But I could always kick a football. So next week I played full back. And that suited me. The running game didn't suit me, but the catch and kick game suited me because I could, even those old leather balls, I could punt a ball 60 yards without any trouble. So next year, second year, I played fullback for the seconds, and the third year, the first grade fullback had an injury that finished his football career, and so I ended up in first grade in the third year, and then 1945 we beat Carlton 6-3 in the grand final. But I played 100 first grade games. I played 50 at fullback and 53 on the wing because after 50 games, Billy Gardner came along who played for Australia. He kicked me out.
John, if you could put a billboard up so the whole world could see it, what message would you put on it?
Oh dear, that's a hard one. That's a hard one. I'd have to think that one out, I think. I will think it out for a couple of minutes while you go on.
During your life, you've exceeded in your working life, you've enjoyed your sport, but there must have been times when things didn't go your way, that life didn't travel the course that you thought it would. What got you through when things were difficult? Where did the resilience come from? If you were to give some advice to your children or your grandchildren or for generations to come, what would it be about moving on? And
Well, I think I had one or two setbacks, but through my career. But I would say to my children, if you will have setbacks in your life, don't react to them. Don't go crazy and react immediately to them. Take it on board and think it out. And if you've got a problem, don't forget no one person can make the best decision. If you've got an opportunity to get more information or talk to somebody who has relevant knowledge, do it before you make an important decision to change things. And I've tried to tell my kids that, just be careful. I've always said to my managers, you're there to make a decision, but don't forget, no one man can make the best decision on any matter. If there was always somebody there with more experience or more knowledge than you don't have to take everything they say as gospel. But for goodness sake, you can learn from them. There'll be enough times in your life when you can't do that and you've got to make a decision.
have you ever used the cordial, kids, in that circumstance?
No, not really, no. I've been quiet there.
What about the billboard, John?
Well, I'm not sure.
Do you have a mantra or something that you come back to about that's helped you?
I think it's probably what we've just been talking about. There's always help about for whatever you do. I think never set yourself up as the expert in anything. There's always people to help, and there's always a lot of people willing to hear your case and help. And it doesn't take long, really.
What gives you joy now?
Well, I think association with the club. When I joined the committee and the work we were able to do after the earthquake. I was vice president when the earthquake time. Tony Samway was in Sydney, and the secretary manager, Ian, somebody else, rang me up and said, "Do you want to go into the club?" I said, "Yeah." I went over with Dorothy to see her father in June Street, Merriweather. He was sitting out in the footpath, and he said, "They reckon there's going to be aftershock." He said, "But if they don't soon happen, I'm going in for my cup of tea." I came to the club, and we walked in that back door, and the floor was covered with white speckles. Where every joint in all the plaster had broken, and on the floor. And we went into the wheeler room, and you've probably seen it up here. The camel was halfway off the mantelpiece, and Ian looked at me. I'll get his name in a minute. Ian looked at me, and I looked at him. I said, "Oh, we better push it back." We both hated it. We better push it back. But we, as a result of the earthquake, I was on a sort of building committee at the time too, and our first floor accommodation was pretty lousy over years. And in negotiations with the insurance company, we came to an agreement that the damage on first floor was about $90,000. We decided, instead of filling up every crack up here, we would spend it all on the new suites down that end. Well, we ended up with 6 butte suites and a hallway blank up to the wall, which now leads into Claremont. And then we were able to go seek reciprocal clubs. That's when the reciprocal club started.
John, you have grandchildren?
Yes, we've got 6 great-grandchildren. 6 grandchildren, mate. 6 wonderful grandchildren. And when we went to Whyalla, we had 3 small boys. And when we left Whyalla, we left 2 boys in Adelaide, and one studying at university in Adelaide. Of course, they all played Australian rules, which I had to learn. And but our youngest son now is here in Newcastle, which is a great help to us. But we get to see them not as often as we'd like to, but our 3 sons were great kids. They all loved their sport. They all had a sense of humour. They all like a drop of wine occasionally. No, we've always got on together. My eldest son, unfortunately, is divorced, but he parted from his wife in amicable terms. But the others, the 6 grandchildren, we had the eldest now is the 2 girls are engaged to be married. The boys are a bit slow, but they'll be okay. Our one granddaughter is being married in October, and the eldest granddaughter will be the year after, I think. But they're all leading busy lives, and yeah.
Well, John, thank you very much for sharing some of your story. It's been a remarkable life. It's been a privilege. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm glad I wasn't able to tell you some of the stories. Thanks, Pat.